a Zoom preview and seminar for our exhibition, Patterns of the Past, Weaving Heritage in Pakistani Art. We exhibition in collaboration with Mira is here, but I don't know. So we couldn't have done this without her, and we're very grateful for Canvas Gallery's help and support and for annual exhibition. The exhibition is curated by the one and only Zara Jumaboy, who has done a wonderful job in bringing together these 5 different artists who are currently all in different time zones. So she has done a fabulous job in creating this exhibition. Thank you. The artists in the show include Adeela Suleman, whom you can see behind me, Bushra Waqas Khan, David Aylesworth, Liaqat Rasul, and Ruby Chishti, who have all, again, done a spectacular job and created some of the most beautiful works we've ever seen. Thank you all for your hard work and effort that you've put in this exhibition towards the show of October. So if you haven't, and before I hand you over to Zara, please can I ask everyone to mute their microphones, not microscopes, because of the interference. There will be a Q&A session after the end of the chat, and you can ask questions then. Now over to Zara, who will introduce the curatorial concept behind the show and the artists, as well as the speakers. Okay, over to you, Zara.
So many of you for joining us. What we're going to start with is a little virtual tour. So I'll take you through some pictures of the exhibition and how it actually looks in this space. So here's our Patterns of the Past conference, and it is called Textile, Tradition and the Contemporary. And I'll tell you a little bit about what the conference is sort of planning to do in terms of sort of conceptual analysis. But right now we'll just focus a little bit on the show and our wonderful 5 artists. So here, for those of you who haven't seen it, is what the show looks like in the gallery space. We've given you a few images, and then Kajali will take over and actually use her phone to take you around the show. So you'll have to bear with us while we sort of get that bit set up. A few images. This is Adeela's work. This is also Adeela's work. Sorry. This is Ruby Chishti. This is Bushra's work, and this here is David Aylesworth's work, another Bushra, and this is Liaqat. So here are some openings, images from the show's opening. You can sort of spot the people. Liaqat, by the way, Noor, and Mr. Munir. And anyway, so we thought we'd include a few pictures so that you also feel like you've been to the real opening, not just the virtual one. And this is our thank you to Samira. As Kajali said, we really could not have done this show without her and the collaboration with Canvas Gallery. And this is the 2nd year that Connor and Samira have invited me to curate something for Grosvenor as part of this collaboration. So thank you very much to Samira, and we will really miss her not participating today. So yeah, this is me, and if you're extremely interested, you can read up about me, but you shouldn't be. And here again is a little snippet of the show, and this is a close-up of a Ruby work that we're going to be analyzing in some depth with Ruby. I just wanted to show you how it looks. And I'm going to give you a little bit of, you know, the kind of the two axes in which I sort of conceived the show, and all the works for the show, all the 5 artists were especially invited. 2 axes of this show, all the 5 artists were, you know, very carefully selected by Samira, me, and Connor. And we invited them to make work specially for it. in some ways in conversation with each other as well. And we chose them because each one of these artists have a different angle on ideas of textile and how they've been using it. But you know, when I sort of produced a brief for which they sort of worked towards, there were two things in my mind. The first is this Navina Haider quote from the Hindu. And of course, as people know, she's a senior curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for Islamic and South Asian artifacts and textiles and art. And so she wrote this really interesting and lovely article many years ago, 2015, just after certain people in India came to power. In 2014, and this is what Heather had to say. Textile makers and other creative individuals have knitted India together over centuries, creating a fabric that reflects the blends of faith and regions and many foreign influences. So there's one idea of South Asian textiles and fabric traditions, which sees it as a process of connectivity traced all the way back to something like the Silk Route. And, you know, through this sort of trade in textiles and through this sort of construction of the motifs of the various textile traditions of South Asia, it's a way of sort of being multi-faith and the sort of intercultural interactions happen. So that was one idea that we were sort of exploring with this show, is it's the way in which textiles can be used in contemporary art, but the textile history within South Asia is one that is a connector. But then, of course, there's another axis, and I will give you a quote from Rosemary Krill. And in a book that Liaqat Rasul is mentioned in for his designer label, his fashion label, Ghulam Sakina, and this is what Rosemary Krill has to say. She says, Indian nationalists were forswearing imported cloth as early as 1872, and in 1896, activists of the Swadeshi, own country, this is her translation, not mine, movement, were already making bonfires of imported cloth. So on the one hand, you have a textiles sort of connection with linkages across South Asia and across Asia, and ideas of conviviality. On the other hand, you also have textile as a tool for nationalist sentiment, but potentially also independence and violence. But and contained within this quote is also an implicit sort of awareness of textiles' abilities to talk about identity issues, which is what this show sort of explores. And part of what we will be doing for this conference is looking at these identity issues with a series of more serious sort of investigations with textile history. But for now, as I said, we're just going to give you a little virtual walkthrough. Here again is another image, Bushra, David, Adeela, Liaqat, and another Bushra. And another image, another image. This is Ruby's amazing work. And now I'm going to stop my screen share and pass it over.
And good morning, everyone. Thank you, Zara, for making me part of this beautiful project, and Grosvenor Gallery, and of course, Samira Raja. My background has been that I was a mature student at the IVS. I did my master's in international relations, and then I went to an art school, and I think that really affected my artistic practice in terms of that the world was open up to me. But at the school also, I think being under the guidance of David, he really shattered the preconceived notions of art, and he opened up the world to me in terms of how we can look at different things and how art can be interpreted in different mediums and materials. And also he opened up the in terms of the city to us, though I was already interested in the city. And that was the greatest thing that I would say that could happen to me, coming from a background and then also spending time with David for 4 years. And so I started looking outside my studio space in terms of what was happening outside on the roads and the urban craft that was available. But the difference here was that I was bringing the urban craft into my studio space by trying to make it my own. And how can I intervene into the craft to make it my own language? And that's how the whole process and the investigation started. Uh, uh, if you come into my studio, Zara, we can move on to the next image. If you see my studio, I work with a lot of craft people. There's a video which has been made by one of my studio person because we asked.
The video now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Oh, fingers crossed it works. Yes. So the process, looking at the craft that was available and the local craft that is available, I don't intervene the material and the things that they use, but I do intervene in terms of how they use it and how I can make it my own language. So I have a whole team of people working with me in my studio, and we can move on to the next image. And as you can see, there are different like metal workers, wood carvers, embroidery people, people working on the Vespa, and that craft is no more the one that is available on the roadside now. And it has been pushed to the limits in terms of how we can move forward with it. So if we can go next, Sarah. Adeela, you were going to talk a little bit about how you sort of transitioned with different media, so that people sort of understand that you do work with like.
So sometimes I look at the object and I look at the craft and I know exactly what I want to do. And sometimes I have an idea and I look for the craft and how I can make it. So it's a two-way process. It doesn't happen automatically. I think it happens with a back and forth process that happens between the market and myself and my studio space. So even the craft that I'm working with, it's not just one go. It goes back and forth between me and the artisans and the team working in the studio. And then we decide that where to stop. They're very much part of my process. They are very much glorified. I have they're very proud of the fact that they are trying to do something different with me, and they're very happy to collaborate. And Hanif Bhai, Yunus Bhai, all these men working with me. I had a huge challenge in terms of initially working with all these men. They were not taking me seriously, but then I used to sit in their studios and used to mend the mistakes that were made, and that's when they started taking me seriously, because they were just like thinking that what are you doing, and they used to question my concept also. Okay, what good it will bring, like why are you doing this, why would you do this? And there's a whole, so now they have been working for the last 22 years with me, and they are very much part of the studio. They come in at 10 a.m. in the morning, leaves at 10 in the night, and so it's a beautiful give and take process that happens. So they are my Ustad, and they call me now. They have started calling me Ustad also with the time that has passed. And yeah, we can go to move next slide. So So whether it's a repousse work that happens on the Vespa wheel cover, but it's not a Vespa work anymore. The painting that used to happen on the Vespa, it's not a painting that happens on the Vespa anymore. It is very intricate and very detailed now. Even with the embroidery, that is a new journey that I have started. We are trying to push the limits in terms of how many layers, how we can work with it. It's initial, it's a new process that I'm discovering. I have done embroidery pieces before, 8, 9 years back, but now I think I'm fully. Mrs. Smile has been, she has been guiding me through in terms of how I can work more on them and how I can make them better. This is Yunus Bhai and Rafiq Saab. So no matter how best quality paints you give them, they will come back to their own material, and they would like to work with that. And that's a beautiful process, because I don't push them in terms of how, but in terms of what that has to be made. That's where my input comes, and that's where I intervene. And next, we can go next.
Yeah, so if you could
Khalil Bhai
say
and
a
Jameel
bit
Bhai.
about, when you sort of shifted to making things with textiles, and we added this last night actually, Kajali and me, because we just thought we just love this little sign off. Which, by the way, we actually, when Adeela first sent us the pictures of the ready work, there were 3 pictures that came, and we were like, oh, are we getting a third work? But actually, it was just the back of the work. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about
So
that.
most of my works are signed off at the back, and they have a seal at the back. And this was one of the seals that we made for the embroidery work. It's an embroidered work, and with my name. So my name was keep fiddling, because 2 of them does not know how to write, and they so we are. So I like those little mistake where the dal goes a little longer and the yed ka nuktas, are not where they should be. So I enjoy the fact that there is this rawness to it, and there is this innocence to it. So all the works are signed off at the back. I try to do that. And so with next slide, we can go to the next slide.
Okay, so this is like a close up, and I thought we could talk a little bit about this particular work. And
So, uh,
yeah,
yeah.
let
So
me see.
I work with the found object, found techniques, found stories, found images, and then I layer them together with the experiences that I have gone through. So the work is not just one simple read, but then I try to layer it with a lot of things that I have experienced in my life. And my whole artistic endeavor has been, in the last 10 or 15 years, have been an investigation into the violence, and the violence that was outside my personal space. When it entered into my personal space, how my life changed. And the kind of life that me and my husband lives, and how it has affected our daily endeavor, how our daily life, and how we negotiate in the city our safety, our family's safety. And I think the images of violence, it's like history repeating itself. So I look at images of the past, and I try to make them here. And I was looking at the Islamic history. I was looking at the history of the subcontinent, where the imagery has been used to document the history. And of course, miniature paintings play a lot, role in that. And I started looking at the war scenes. Started looking, and this is one of the Manuku, the Nightmare of a Dream of a King. But here, the story which I was drawn to is when he says that, he has, the war happened, and now there was a process of introspection in which he was saying that a sin has been committed, that the young boys that I have killed, so many people have been slain. And that's what I was drawn towards this. In the process of introspection, I think the artists themselves are so selfish. When we look at someone else's pain, we always try to see, and that happens with my father's death also, that when you go through something, and that is so painful, how do you respond to that? When you experience an event which is larger than life, how do you respond to that, which is unrepresentable? You can't represent someone else's pain, but how do you respect that? And I try to do things that, in terms of that, how one can respect the victims, but also translate their experiences to the viewer. With the work, there is a back and forth. You come drawn to the work with its, the color, the beauty, and the embroidery, but then you are pushed back from it in terms of the what it is portraying, what the image is like. And this whole process of applique work, I think I got interested in it. It's the layering of it, and our life is also layered like that, in terms of that you embed things, you have to embed experiences, and you embed love, passion, whatever that comes to your life, and you try do all those experiences are embedded into it. And if you look at the process of rally making also, you sit, and the women in the village, they sit and they talk, and it's a social act that happens in the evening or in the night. And I think I enjoyed that process, and that's why the applique work started coming into my work, that how one can layer different things, different experiences, different cloth, and all the cloth that has been used, all the thread that has been used, it's very, very, very local. So I like that I'm not dependent on the outside material. I'm dependent what is around me, and I can work with that. So
I thought this was really funny.
yeah, I know this was very funny. My son is there, and he visited with his friends and my friends, so that's
and I just thought you could actually see the scale of it, which is one of the reasons. Other than to tease Adeela, this is another reason I put this picture in there.
this is a surprise, by the way.
Yeah. And yeah, so but it's really it's the it felt in many ways that this work was almost like the fulcrum of the show, because it dealt both with beauty but also terror, and that specific like reference that you say you make to the Manaku work, which is about the Mahabharata and the sort of brother fighting brother, and the sort of fratricidal conflict, which I guess in a way all your work deals with the problems that we are facing in South Asia today.
And these experiences, that the scar that they leave on your memory, and the pain that you experience, and not just on your personal memory, but on the country, the scar. And when you look at it at some location, that how violence is embedded, like if an location has experienced an act of violence or terror, that location cannot be looked at devoid of reminding you of that experience or that act that happened over there. So for me, the location is very important, the scene is very important, the act is very important, and the intensity of violence, the way it is increasing, I'm interested in that also, that why it is that you have killed someone and you will keep on killing them again and again, and knowingly that they are already dead. So those are the things that I'm interested in, that what kind of pleasure violence provide to human beings, that they keep on doing it again and again.
And you were saying something really interesting about how you use from miniature painting, but it's not just one reference. Like you'll have multiple references, and like
So
that tree.
yes, exactly. So when you come into my studio, I'm using one technique with the other one, and I'm using one material with the other material. And that happens with the imagery also, that I combine quite a lot of imageries together to make my one scene. And it's completely up to me, because those are all found images, those are there. So it's not just one painting that is replicated. There are like 10 or 15 or 20 or sometimes three that are combined together to make one imagery that I want to work with. So there is there also the layering process happens. There also something, the trees might be from the trees that are in Karachi, whether it's Gulmohar, whether it's Amaltas, or whether it's lignum. So I have used that with the miniature painting, the trees of my city, and the act of violence that is happening around the world.
So before we go on to Bushra, maybe we just deal a little bit with this image that I thought I had put in at the end, but it was in fact right at the beginning is this one, and I thought maybe we sort of just revisit this, because this is one of the works in the show. Just because of the way in which photographs are taken, we don't tend to focus on it that much. And I thought if you sort of talk a little bit about it.
So I did a whole series of warriors. And I also looked at how Mubarizun, the elite army of the four Khalifas, but the Janissaries, and I consciously, beheaded them in a lot of my works. If you look at my Repusa work that has happened before, and here also, covering the face, which is deliberate covering of the face, that you don't know who is killing who. And you really don't know who's inside, and we see that in a lot of wars now, that who is in someone else's uniform. We really don't know the nationality. We really don't know. They don't even know why they are fighting. Why they are in the war, and covering the face or beheading them is one of the things that I have done consciously in my work. And that's I think that work talks about that the act of violence, you don't even know who is committing that act.
Okay, so and now we're going to move on, so you can have a good look at these images again. And I thought we would now move on to Bushra. And if you see the way in which we positioned it in the show, this is not really my hang. This is actually the brilliant Charlie and Connor. It sort of did the hang even before I got there. And I love the way they've done the hang, because there's so many conversations between the works that they sort of pull out, and that whole conversation between David's very embroidered sort of horticultural prints in effect, but they are very, very embroidered, and the way that sort of plays off the applique work in Adeela's is amazing. And so from that we sort of carry on to look at Bushra, and perhaps Bushra can come on and unmute herself and lead this.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, hello everyone. If everyone is good. And I think Adeela Suleman made it very elaborate, because it's a textile based show, and everyone's practice is interlinked with the other artists. So thank you for that. It elaborated a lot. So I'm a printmaker. I graduated as a printmaker in 2008. And I am basically from Multan. It's one of the oldest cities in the world. After graduation, I went back to my city, started exploring what it's most famous for, the craft. And it definitely is famous for craft, that for especially the clothes we wear at ceremonies and weddings. So teaching the textile students, I got interested in how this practice can be blended with textiles, because back at thesis time, I had been working with the garments, but that was on two-dimensional surface. Here, it started taking more of a sculpture form. Because whenever I look back at the designs I was making, for myself, it was a very intriguing question that why not make something wearable out of it? I had no idea that wearable is going to be at a very minute scale. So I have been working with the official stamp paper. It is pretty much linked with everyone. Yes, that's a stamp paper. It's a photocopy of a stamp paper. So I isolate its motifs and start making patterns out of it. So whatever I was making the patterns I was making always started looking more Western, more European. So it came to my mind that except the star and crescent, Chand Sitara, and the Pakistan written on it, and the other text written on it, everything is pretty much very westernized, all the emblems on it. So that's why whatever I was making unconsciously was directing towards that Western motifs and patterns. So going back to its history, why this happened? Because this affidavit was given to us by the Britishers. So it was very clear that there was no doubt that that was the reason that everything I was designing with these motifs started looking very European. So I started exploring more of these. They are they're very surprising the way they behave, because if you look at it closely, just like a printmaker, wherever you put a mark, that can't be, it can never be repeated. Like it's both sides are not equal, so that it can't be forged. Just like currencies, so they have their the secret numbers or secret lines, so that no one can judge it. But looking at it, it all looks very balanced. So that's what happens when I start designing with this paper, that they can't be imitated. Even if I want to repeat the same design again, I can't do that, because if you know the practice of embroidery, you always trace a design and then embroider on it. With my practice, it's the other way around. There's no trace underneath. The cutout motifs, they follow an organic way to make a design, which does look very symmetrical to the eye, but in real, it's not at all symmetrical, just the way the stamp paper works. So the practice is again pretty much the same that I had been doing as a printmaker, because the basic challenge is how to transfer the image. And with this, so the first process is making different motifs out of it, then printing them on the heat transfer paper. Then from that heat transfer paper, the image transferred to the fabric. From fabric, all the modules are hand cut and then hand stitched onto another fabric. So it's like a lot of this work includes a lot of process, and I also does not work like the fashion designers. They first make an illustration, and then they try to get the final garment as much close to the illustration as possible. Here, the illustration is just in the mind. It's not on the paper, just a rough idea, rough sketch. And then just like a printmaker, the best element is the surprise. The elements start getting together, and then the final form is very surprising. And then I have to balance that final form according to what shape it has taken by that work, that precise work I do on it. So I think even when I'm printing it, the ink of that paper is not necessarily transferred onto the fabric. Just like when you peel the paper out of that metal plate, being a printmaker, the result is a surprise. So I really enjoyed that.
Talk a little bit about sort of some of the motifs in the work itself. Also, like, just to point out to people who might not know, because I really didn't know what stamp paper was, and you can see it over here.
Yes,
okay. Really interestingly about the sort of colonial legacy of the stamp paper, but also what it represents in terms of national identity and the contract you said. It's about ownership in a way.
Yes, yes. So this piece of paper, whatever you possess here in Pakistan, either that's land, that's a little, maybe a bicycle, a vehicle, a contract, you're getting married, you're getting divorced, every legal thing is written on it. It's the words that I talk about of this paper, that how a possession becomes your attire, how something that you possess or the worth of this paper is much more than what you say. It's like, and then just like a lot of Asians or South Asians, they know that, you know, we do, our mothers give our heirloom to the daughters. In the same way, this inheritance paper travel in the family from generation to generations, and it's kept, it's hidden, it's always in the locker shelves, and it's like, you know, very close to someone who possessed something. And that's where I, you know, that's what intrigued me, is how the worth of that paper transfer to another generation. And especially, it's like the way, you know, the Britishers used to do. If you did not had a male heir in the family, it was, if you just had daughters, your all the inheritance fortune was passed to another male heir of the closer circle in the family. So it's more like, as mothers are giving their garments to their daughters, this is more like given to the men in the family. And this is where inheritance law comes.
Mm-hmm. Bushra, shall we sort of press on a little bit? So I put an image here, your image of your work is currently at the V&A. So Bushra was selected for the Jameel Art Prize. She was one of the nominees. And so one of her dresses, as you can see, is actually hanging at the V&A as part of the Jameel Art Prize exhibition. And I thought it was really interesting to give you a little contrast to the extent to which the sort of the dresses, even though they're tiny, fit into a larger aesthetic about sort of textiles and their colonial histories, and the extent to which sort of things like cotton, chintz actually make those connections with a larger sort of British heritage, which is something we'll discuss quite a lot in the conference. And then I thought maybe, Bushra, if we can just linger a little bit with this image, because you wanted some close-ups of some of the motifs, and maybe we can just look at the three little dresses which are in the show, but we actually have 5, but we've just like picked out 3 over here.
Okay, so the dress that you showed, which is at currently at the exhibition at V&A, it's actually a fusion of jama. So the skirt is a jama, and the sleeves are the Victorian sleeves, and they were called matano leg sleeves. It was the name given to that because they look like the butchered leg of mutton. So even if you look at the stamp paper, it's a fusion of emblems. This is what we see everywhere around, because we have been colonized. We cannot change the history. So let's, through this work, I celebrate the fusion of it. It's more like they should, because as I mentioned earlier, whatever I was designing started looking very European. But when you get closer to these garments, or you look at the design of it, they are very Eastern. Mm-hmm. Like you can look at all the repetitive motifs on it. You can look at this, especially the image you are showing with the star and crescent, very minute details. You have to just come closer to it to see all the details. So it's more of a fusion in all the designs I do.
Mm-hmm. And I loved what you said about black tulip. So each little dress has got its name. So this is Sub Rosa, which is why we also sort of wanted to place it quite close to David's work, because David will talk about his Sub Rosa series. But so this is Sub Rosa, this is Black Tulip, and
this one is a well-loved piece of leftover. I love giving titles to the work. I enjoy it. So at times, what happens is before making the work, the title is there and then the work is made. But again, sometimes it's vice versa. The work gets made and then I give the title. So I would like to talk about the black tulip.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, let's do that.
So it was more like this was the best surprise of when I was making the work for this particular show. So what happens with this one was, it was more like Alexander Dumas' The Black Tulip novel. It's a romantic novel where the rebels are against the governor of the province, and then there's a competition of who gets successful in making a black tulip, which is very rare. So in the end, what the story was more about, the play of characters, fate, providence, misfortune. So here first I made a black tulip. I rendered the drawings by cutting the photocopies of the affidavit paper. So they're more like the drawings are very important for these. Then after constructing that drawing of black tulip, I deconstructed it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the skirt, again, it's a fusion of that jam and the matnano leg sleeve. It has 50 panels. So it was more of a play of that black tulip, just like the characters of that novel going up and down, trying to complete or complement each other, which was not being possible. And it was more like
colonial greed in a way, or like just greed in general.
Yes.
Tulip.
Yeah. And how in the midst of a misfortune, greater happiness is ahead. Like when it's in a complete form, you enjoy it. You look at it and you enjoy it. And it was more like, it was a romantic novel. It's more like love and flowers can grow within stone walls.
Oh, that's...
And then, so if you look at it, you might think that it's made on a black fabric. But if someone is there, if you have been to the exhibition, I keep telling the viewer that you just slightly need to go underneath the skirt, which might not sound appropriate, but it's all on white silk. It's not on black fabric.
Wow.
So yes, that's what the surprise element I was talking about. That silk, how it transforms, the fabric transforms its form, and it instantly starts looking like something is made out of leather.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of that printing technique.
Mm-hmm.
And the layers of fabric.
And like each one, which is like, which I hope that Kajal is going to try again, after the artists have finished talking, and we're going to like take a shot.
Even I would like to talk about this, well-loved piece of leftover.
Yes.
This was, I wish we had a zoom in of this.
No, and this one also with the little crystals.
I'll be quick with that because I know everyone has to say about their work. So it's made with all the leftover pieces I have used in all these years, because there's a lot of labor into it. It's like more of a meditating, sitting and cutting very minute pieces that I cannot let them get roasted. So here, this one is made with all the leftover pieces. And then going to the sub rosa, again, it was, this one has actually 554 roses on it. Again, going back to what Adeela ji said, that I don't hinder with the technique of the craftsman. You might have seen these flowers on all the ceremonial clothes that we wear here. I just give them the medium or shift their practice to make it more contemporarized, to freshen it up. So every flower has 15 to 18 petals. So it's closed in the beginning when the stitcher is stitching it onto the fabric. And then once it's done, every single petal is open. So imagine there are like 554 flowers on this. And each flower has 15 to 18 petals, which individually opened and then got stitched on it. And then it also has that little bling I call, back in the time, it was believed that anything that shined used to wave the evil eye off. So I use these little crystals in the middle to centralize that flower or a rose.
Yeah. And hopefully we can get up close to it at some point. Bushra, I'm going to start. So here another close up, and as you can see, each garment, you can look at them from different angles, and they have different sculptural qualities. So like this sub rosa, if you're looking from on top, it's a completely different structure to something like that. Or
this is the sorry, Zara, this is the thing I was talking about, that there's no fashion illustration. Once this was, so it actually, the skirt has 2 circles. Once it was made, they become so heavy that the fabric itself direct myself and my tailor to have a form. And this is made in organza. You can see how flimsy, how feminine that fabric is, how soft that fabric is. But how it changes its form because of the thing that is put on it.
Everyone, and thank you so much, Adeela, for your very sweet praise. And it seems like just yesterday I was in your studio, I suppose it was at the beginning of the year, and playing on your gorgeous Path embroidery machine. And I look forward to being back there again soon. So I'm going to mute my video while I talk through these. And can we have the first slide, please? Can we move on to the, okay, there we go. So my paternal grandfather was the horticulturist F.W. Alesworth. And these are some of the things that lie under and behind the works in the show. He died when I was very young and I really didn't know him at all, but I think as a 5-year-old, he taught me my first botanical name. And now I continue to meet him on the internet as more and more documents are digitized, various prefaces to books and societies. He was the secretary of the Dahlia Society and things like that. So, and this rose, it grew in the 2 gardens that I grew up in. My mother always said it was a particularly hideous shade of orange. And Woolworths apparently sold it like mad in the 1950s. And then now I think it's rather obscure. So I have spent my life making and caring for gardens as well as making art. And amongst the Mali population and the nurseries of Karachi and Lahore, I'm also known as the Gora Mali, which translates as the white gardener. So my...
Can you talk a little bit about what you said about Redoute and the sort of growing up with these very on your wall? Sorry.
I will. I shall come to that. So my grandfather, it turns out my grandfather gifted my parents this set of Redoute rose prints, which hung over the glass-fronted bookcase in my mother's best lounge in the Surrey house I grew up in. And my elder sister recently told me just the other day that he had gifted these. And I've always looked at the Redoute prints as the kind of thing that a well-educated and cultured family might hang on their wall. Can we have the next slide? So I moved to Pakistan in 1987 and actually went there at that time to work on a landscaping project. And I took on Pakistani nationality around 1993. And I came from a strongly formalist sculpture education in Wimbledon, where there was a lot of emphasis on traditional materials and processes and quite a lot of machismo in the making and in the department. And really those early encounters with the urban crafts and the markets of Karachi in the 1980s and the late 1980s were transformative for me. So this is the kind of work that we were doing as a group, and this is a collaborative work, but a lot of the work at that time was collaborative with urban crafts people and amongst the art community. Next slide, please. Okay, and jumping forward to 2010, I began what I call these textile interventions, these palimpsests, and the Redoute works are palimpsest too, of course. In 2006, I'd moved to Lahore to teach at BNU, and in 2007, I began this a late MFA at Transart Institute in Berlin. And that was a period of me collapsing my, the two trajectories of my life, garden design and horticultural consultancy and art making. I sort of collapsed them into the same space very willfully. And I continue to intervene on paradise carpets, and I take the paradise carpet as a cultural signifier. And I also read it in relation to Michel Foucault's theory of the heterotopia. So around that time, I also built up this work from photos from horticultural labels and botanical gardens from Europe and from Pakistan. And thinking about all the regional liberties that they take with Linnaean taxonomy. But also, in retrospect, I look at this and I see it as a kind of death of nature piece. The end of nature that, there's not a single plant in sight, but there's all these dappled plastic labels in the sunshine that we have all the names. But, the plants are not there. And next, please. In 2018, I participated in this Pioneer Cement residency in conjunction with Canvas Gallery, Karachi, and I produced a series of land art drawings on a massive scale. These are of plants, selected plants from the fossil record. And, it was my response to the sort of 2,000 acres of the Pioneer site, including their quarries on site. And there are thousands of tons, many thousands of tons, tens of thousands of tons of coal. And walking those coal yards in the mornings, jet lagged, and looking at my footprints on the limestone dust lying over the coal inspired these drawings. And I was going to call them drawings from the Anthropocene, but I settled on drawings in time. And the drawing surface here is approximately 90 meters by or maybe not 90 meters. It's about 300 feet. And absolutely huge. And I photographed them from a jib arm crane every day before the sun set. And those are the works that led directly to the Redoute embroideries. And here we have them. So the text here is in Latinate English and Latinate French, which I found particularly interesting. And that also speaks very much about the politics of the time, the struggle for the lingua franca of science, but also Redoute acknowledging his multitude of patrons. He spent a lot of time at Kew, but he also had patrons, including Marie Antoinette and the Empress Napoleon. So he lived in interesting times. And I can't, although his life crossed over with Linnaeus, I can't place him at Uppsala yet. So, and I look at these annotated, these beautiful, gorgeous annotated, botanical illustrations. He's known as, the Raphael of botanical illustration, but I also think of him as sort of epitomizing botany of empire. So let's have the next slide, please. So a lot of these names have changed. There is no indica circulata. It is now Rosa chinensis, and plant taxonomy is constantly in flux. But if, you know, for me, the traveling of the rose print from my mother's Surrey lounge, through my life spent in Pakistan, and my encounters with the sort of urban crafts there, and moving through my Bristol studio, and then back into the wedding clothes markets in Karachi. Next slide, please. So you can see here that the redoute print is literally underneath. And in a way, this is a process that started with something like Heart Mahal, where we gave our drawings to the Rapuse craftsman, who promptly stuck them straight onto the stainless steel sheets and punched right through them. And in a way, it's sort of looping right back to that. And these embroideries, I mean, they'd be sort of archivally printed in the University of West of England print lab on cotton silk. And then bits of the embroidery are started in my Bristol studio. And then they go to Gizri in Karachi, where the wedding embroiderers then sort of look at my interpretation and build up this relief work. With the carpet works and the embroidery works, I think of them as sculptural works. And I think of them also as a sort of act of undoing in terms of the sort of 20th century history of male sculptors, I suppose. Next, please. And you can see a detail here of how the works are actually built up in relief. Next. And the companion works for this is the erasure of an entire paradise carpet, you know, with this depiction of the Charbagh at its center. And paradise coming from Paradesa Avestan for a brick wall, you know, so the ultimate gated community. And what is happening here is that all of the floral motifs are being erased in black wool systematically. It's taking a very long time. It's not finished here. I had hoped to show it in conjunction with these works in the gallery. Next, please. Ooh, that's it.
Yeah, so there was a good end, because it kind of also then links you back with Adeela. And so just to say that this was going to be also a piece that we were going to have in the show, which would be, right, like sort of a shadow work that would work with your other shadow works, and sort of Adeela's very brightly colored things. But well, COVID and one thing and another, didn't get this. So that's why we thought we would sort of end on this.
I think, you know, I mean, for me, these are works about the corruption of the garden and what we're doing to the planet. And the rose in particular is, you know, has so many connotations, both East and West. And I also think of redoute as sort of adding the visual proof to Lalayan taxonomy. You know, if we're talking about documents and proof, I mean, in a way, you know, prior to photography, that's what he was doing. He was, you know, cataloging all of these things coming in through empire. Yeah, so I think that's it. I think I actually kept on time.
You did,
Yes.
which is...
Told you I would.
Yes, you did. So now we're welcoming Liaqat, who, if Liaqat, you can sort of unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi, and sort of take us through your works a little bit and tell us what you want to focus on. And as you can see, I've updated what we had yesterday and put of yourself next to the mobile so that we can see. And Liaqat has got 3 works in the show. His are also very unusual because they've used textiles, but they've done so in sculptural form in some cases. In some cases, they riff on painting and wall hangings as well. So maybe, Liaqat, you can sort of take us through the...
So this is my second mobile, and I did the Grace and Perry Art Club submission last year, and it was an opportunity for me to do work from 2D to sculpture mobiles and this active movement. And because it was sort of like the Grace and Perry Art Club, which is just this fun thing that Grace and Perry put together during the pandemic, the first pandemic. And I basically based it on multiculturalism and London and sort of walking around London and things that I see and the senses that come to me. I mean, everything's fairly abstract in the way that I work. There's no real kind of soundbite or story or kind of connectivity in terms of like, this is this or this is that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I've just written down a few things because I'm kind of like, I can't talk as well as some of the people have been talking. So anyway, developing new ways of pattern is something that I find really interesting, and the relationship between thinking, thought processes and pattern. And I think that I don't really, when I'm in the studio, it can just be quite, I don't know, sort of intuitive. Like I have all my base materials, I have all these collections of ephemera, of old envelopes, old letters, papers, packaging papers, cheap, really cheap tissue paper that everybody else might reject, egg boxes, inserts that are in cardboard packaging, mm-hmm. You know, all of these in my head dance in my mind as shapes and patterns, and I love seeing opportunity in things that don't really have that much value perhaps, and I would see ways of putting those things together. Mm-hmm. I see everything as a textile. I don't see sort of, it's not just about fabric, it's about, you know, it could be concrete, it could be, you know, urban, sort of walking down a road and seeing, you know, that is texture, that is textile. Experiences can be textiles as well. And I find that really exciting. What else?
You gave me this little quote about multicultural London, but also about the fact that according to you, there is nothing such as rubbish. Even things that people might throw out, like little hole punched things, can be precious. Yeah. And I thought if we could sort of end on you looking at this work present. Yeah. And the little dishcloth that you pointed out in the middle of it.
Yeah, so exactly. I think I get very excited by the combination of different materials put together. So there was plastic sheeting that I bought some very expensive paper and it was wrapped in this plastic sheeting. So this is included, in this. And then an old dishcloth. There's like 20 layers of tissue paper behind the dishcloth. That I just wanted to keep that sense of reams of paper and that kind of idea, and sort of evoke ideas and memories for the viewer. I mean, the viewer is very important to me. When people look at the work, that's also part of what I do. I want to sort of entertain people when they're looking at a piece of art of mine, and spend time looking at it and stepping back. Mm-hmm. And also the other thing is kind of, I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because I just think as we drive into the digital age at, you know, at really high speed, I feel even more kind of passionate about expressing myself through paper and a textile sort of art form, because I'm worried about the fact that nobody will be able to write anything down soon, actually. You know, and I think that, you know, whereas everything is kind of naive looking, and, you know, it's very much about very simple mark making. It's also low tech. You know, there's lots of felt tips, staples, sellotape, things that are just around me, biros, pencils, I can puncture paper. All of those things, it is a reaction to this digital age that we're living at the moment, and it's sort of anti-smartphone, anti-digital, being a lazy whatever. You know, I just feel I'm slightly worried about the human race right now. And
Liaqat, I wondered whether sort of as a kind of like an endpoint, we can actually look at, you know, something have been wanting to ask you.
yeah,
That you're one of the, in fact, the only artist in this show that actually has a background in fashion, and you came to art as very much, and whether you actually see that that difference is impacting the way in which you conceive of yourself as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I really kind of found it really, really hard, actually, because I had a women's wear label called Ghulam Sakina, and I named that after my parents' first names, and because I really wanted to reference Pakistan and Urdu. So what was really interesting was I did a fashion and textiles degree. And then when I liquidated, and it was all heavily embroidered and worked in Calcutta, Jaipur, Delhi. When I liquidated, I literally was slightly gobsmacked, and I just had to run away from fashion. I worked in a pub for 5 years. And I remember really focusing on working on a pub and making sure that whatever I did next, and I didn't know then that I wanted to be a collage artist, the point of working in that pub and sort of taking myself out of the creative industries was for me to intuitively decide what I wanted to do without any influence. So I often don't talk about the fashion because I kind of feel like that's in the past, but in actual fact, it's a huge part of who I am. And actually working in India, studying in Delhi, and you know, seeing all those sort of textiles, those rich, beautiful textiles that all tell these wonderful, amazing stories, has influenced my practice today. And if I do any embroidery, I'm very conscious of embroidering, so that's why I normally just do a kanta stitch. I don't want to be seen as a fashion person that's jumped ship and says, "Hey guys, I'm an artist." You know, it took me a long time for me to say that I was an artist. I really wanted to be sincere about my practice and my work.
So I'm now going to move over to Ruby, and maybe so in the show, you can actually see that where we positioned Ruby is right next to Liaqat, which is why I thought it would be a good transition. And also because Ruby uses a lot of ceremonial cloth from the sort of wedding and fashion industry, like within her work, which from a distance also looks incredibly beautiful and glittery. And but then when you go up close, some of it is quite you know, disturbing. So it's almost like the opposite to Liaqat in some ways, that, you know, are things that find a home, but then they also, the more you look at them, the more unhomely they are. So I wondered, Ruby, if you could perhaps come and like take us through your work, and then I know you have a tiny video that you wanted to share.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Grosvenor Gallery, for all these amazing artists and speakers today. But I would like to take the opportunity to express my profound gratitude to my mentor, Mrs. Salima Hashmi. I will forever treasure the perspective and insight she gave it to me. And she shared with me. I remember one always, and that was concentrate on the spirit. It is about the work when she was advising, and she would not say much, but like a few words would just, you know. So thank you so much, Mrs. Hashmi, for everything. So about myself, I was born long time ago. It's an event of past century. I was born in a family as a fourth daughter, and I have the memories of childhood, which I remember are of gender disparities. When I grew up, I studied at National College of Arts, and I know that as a woman, we all have to fight battles to live our life the way we want. So my work also reflects that. But when I was studying, there was a time of censorship on media during the Ziaul Haq period of dictatorship, when the figurative sculpture was sort of not acceptable. It was slashed in our sculpture studio by someone, you know, and overall it was very stressful atmosphere, and public hangings and all that. It was just awful. And also I remember one thing, that the families would sit around the radio listening to BBC London about the news, which were, you know, what was happening actually in our country. And the signals were fading and sometimes clear, they could not hear properly. Newspapers were censored to a point that you could barely make any sense of the words on this blank page. So all these things help, or you say that were process of my growing up. And when I studied at National College of Arts, I was trained in Western classical manner with wood, bronze, clay, and other materials. I never worked with cloth, but I had the history of making my dolls and transforming my siblings' clothing something that, excuse me, that I could wear. I was as young as, I think, 7-year-old when I realized that I don't like the clothing which was given to me. It was so generic and boring. So I started hand sewing and transforming them into my clothes. On this exhibition, I have particularly incorporated the ceremonial clothing from my collection. In my visit to Canada a couple of years ago, I met a woman who used to do the alterations on bridal clothing, and I got a full bag of the cut-ups or the other scraps of very expensive fabric from her, and that gave me the idea to sort of make some changes in my work and look differently to the same material. And so I refigure women's ceremonial clothing, and from the discarded fashion garments, I buy from thrift stores in Brooklyn and wherever I can get. So these works are kind of to create autobiographical narratives that are intended to question the heroics of colossal masculinity and gender disparities. So this is all about it. And yeah.
I just wanted to sort of point out, in case people are missing this, is that if you go up close, you can actually see these doll figures. And I wondered, actually, Ruby, if you can see them like really sort of
yeah, here too.
Closely, yeah. So I mean, it's beautiful, and you're sort of bombarded with both, like, you know, being seduced and wanting to see more, and then suddenly you'll notice something, and then you can't stop noticing these little women with hair but all sort of curled up. You never see their faces. Maybe, Ruby, you can talk a little bit about that. And here they are again. This is the other work in the show. So yeah, can you tell us about these women?
Yeah, sure. These are ancestral figures, women that I have seen around always, whether walking on the streets or sitting on a motorbike behind someone. And I could see their contours of the body and very soft. And but this form actually came from my experience living with my mother for about 10, 11 years when she was paralyzed after an accident. And so in those years, performing different tasks like, giving her shower or, lifting her up. And so the things were repeated so many times that her body was sort of, my hands and, my mind had registered it so well that I could kind of create her without even thinking. It was just in me. So it was in 2002, it was 1999 when I started incorporating all the fabrics which I had collected over the years and would never did anything with it. So the fear of her impending death made me think of doing something so that I will not shatter totally. I started making these figures while she would sleep and by her bedside with hand sew. So I had this training of making my own dolls as a child too, because it was very convenient. Fabric was everywhere. So I had very comfortable relationship with this material. So these are the women. Sometimes I see them mourning at a birth of yet another girl, maybe seated in a circle. But I was interested in looking at the architectural fragments that you see in history and somehow replacing them with my iconography on it. And I made them sit in the patterns that I have seen in Islamic architecture, very, very lace-like and beautiful. I see similarities between the ornamental work, needleworks on clothing, ceremonial clothing of women in Pakistan and those architectural decorations. So sometimes I feel that these architecture belong to these women. So I just wanted to make them like a fragment of from past, because I'm interested in persistent of passage of time, as you see in the layers of geological history and geological time. And I incorporated everything. I never throw even a tiny piece of cloth, whether it's shiny, expensive, or cheap. I just keep it. I'm obsessed with it. So if I see you wearing a nice outfit, I will admire it, but inside me, I'm thinking how I can incorporate into my work. So this is all about obsession. Yes.
And I love the fact that, they're soft sculptures, but actually, like if you see this on the wall, it looks like a solid piece of an architectural fragment, as you say. I have one last question, and then what I'm going to do, because we're sort of completely off in terms of timing, is sort of introduce the next part of the show, pass it over to you, Ruby, then to show your little video, and then we're going to start with Mrs. Hashmi afterwards. So what I shall do here is just tell people what is coming next after Ruby. So we've got three basic categories that we're examining, and they're sort of points that I picked from the show itself, but also the speakers have been chosen because they have histories with these artists in different ways. And of course, we're starting with Professor Hashmi because she's got the biggest history on sort of all of our interpretation of contemporary Pakistani art. And hers will be I Am My Own Maker, and she'll talk about an incredible show that she was involved in curating called Threads, Dreams and Desires, which really sort of set the benchmark for so many of our conversations about how textile should be looked at as a contemporary art, and that sort of border between them. Then there's Maureen Murtaza, who will sort of follow up from that dialogue, but looking specifically at the history of the National College of Art in Lahore, the NCA, and the way in which sort of the colonial inheritance continues to sort of inform the way we look at textiles as a craft rather than as art, and the sort of problematics of naming of the NCA, when it was called the Mayo School of Art or Mayo School of Design or Mayo School of Industrial Arts. And so that's something that Zorien will talk about. So this is a sort of the first panel. We'll then talk about interwoven inheritances, and we have Uttara Rajgopal, who will talk about her own involvement with building up the South Asian textiles in Manchester. And of course, as we know, Manchester has a huge history with South Asia, with British India. It was also called Cottonopolis, and it was the main competitor, as it were, to Indian textiles. And what Kajali and I will do is then add both Uttara and the Studio Karam video onto the site below the Grosvenor Gallery listing of the exhibition. So that way we also save a little bit of time. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand.
Well, I'm really happy to do this because in a sense, we get a chance to go back in history a bit. And I'm really going to talk about, looking at, hey, what happened? You did a stop share. Okay. Okay. Right. Technology will always confound you. And so you have to keep going and try to get over it. This has given me a chance really to reflect a little bit on this Threads, Dreams and Desires, which we did in 2002. And the whole point of that exercise, which we did with a group called Shisha, was looking at 4 countries in the subcontinent in South Asia, which was sort of Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and looking at the connections between the handmade object, which we call craft, and contemporary practices. So this was the idea, allowing us to make those connections, which in fact had been ongoing for a while, but this was a formal way of doing it in England. So this was at the Harris Museum in Preston, and the other shows with Manchester and Liverpool and Oldham, I think. And my effort was to really bring a number of practices that had grown out of the women's movement in Pakistan. And parallel to that, of course, the feminist art historians in the West had been, opening up this whole can of worms, which is called art history, which takes women, on the side. And there were these questions like, why have there been no great women artists in history, from Linda Nochlin and whatnot? But our questioning the canon, which was a male Eurocentric canon, which of course came with colonialism, was that, you went to art school, you learned to draw and paint in a particular way, and that has been referred to earlier. And that, you started with a still life, a piece of drapery and 2 forlorn apples in front of it, and then you progress. But our political and social tumult, and Ruby referred to that, during the 80s and was even a bit earlier, when women were strategically marginalized. And it was the women's movement, both as activists and women poets and artists that we started sort of questioning the canon that we were planted in the middle of. And that is how I went about looking at artists' practices and seeing which artists were really connecting textile and other handmade objects to their contemporary practices. So this is the work that you're looking at is by Masuma Sayed, who is one of the artists in the show. And you can see, you know, she's raided her kitchen and found the materials that she wanted. And these are, she was not only raiding the kitchen, she was also taking apart bits of her body, which were her fingernails, and not just her fingernails, it would be the fingernails of anybody who came into the studio and had slightly. And so you found that, you know, if you'd grown your fingernails and painted them, you were fair play for Masuma. She'd leap at you and take out her nail cutter, and your nails were gone. And they became part of her wonderful necklaces. This one particular work is called My Ladies and My Gentlemen, which was in the show in Preston, which was called Threads, Dreams, Desires. So while I was linking weaving and textile, we're also looking at other things that came out of that tradition. The fact that the work that was there for centuries became a catalyst for turning aside from the canon that we were brought up with. And we're looking now at other processes. So this work by Masuma also, which is like, you know, bits and pieces from cassette tapes, which were the ones you used at the time, and looking at intimate apparel, something that you would not have dared to show publicly in Pakistan. But this became like an act of rebellion. And therefore, it gave the impetus to a lot of women artists at the time to really to look at every kind of a thematic concern and work from new materials, new mediums, new processes. The crown is Masuma's mother's hair, which, you know, women, they comb their hair at the end of the long hair, and then they save the little bits that come out because that's a superstition that you don't let it, throw it anywhere. Somebody might do a bit of black magic. So she made this wonderful work, which I love, called The Crown. And this, which then becomes, the hair kind of goes back and becomes another skin. It originates somewhere else. And as Masuma said, that, you know, the things that are the body's waste, I want to reclaim them. They are mine, they are precious, and I want to make my art out of those things that people would not consider material. Naisa's work also at the time very closely connected to her study of body, the female body, looking at stencils that were used for putting henna on the hands of the bride, and then constructing the female body out of that, and first doing it on the studio, the gallery, and eventually out into the street. I think that the fact that ornament played a great deal of role in the way that women engaged with what was already there in history, and that they had not laid their claim to before. That was something that that artists were doing. Naisa's interest in intimacy that the body enjoys, and that the fabric that covered the body, that uncovered the body, she was looking into traditional and non-traditional materials, things that came from the West and things that originated. For example, the top part of this bodice is actually copied from an 18th century bodice, which came from a family, you know, from Rajasthan, and which she was gifted, and she went on to make other works which eventually became armor, because the step from the intimate apparel to something that protected the body and became the armor was a natural transition for an artist like Naiza. For Aisha Khalid, whose work was also in this show of Threads Dream Desire, these particular works were not. But she was looking at pattern. She was looking at pattern in the interior. She was looking at the interior, which the woman was supposed to stay in, because one of the great orders of the military dictator was that women should stay within the four walls of the house, and they should wear chadars. Chadar and chardivari was. So there was this rebellion, and these works are now post Ziaul Haq, which lets us see that how these legacies are so pernicious and long-lasting that they stay there within society and really chase the woman's understanding of herself. So these Birth of Venus series, if you look at the way that the walls are crushing and coming towards the woman, or the fabric is covering her, pattern which should be enjoyed and celebrated becomes a menace, a menacing factor, because it seems to be adding to the claustrophobia that is there with the female body. And then this work was actually in the show, in Threads, Dreams, Desires. It was when, at a later stage, Aisha starts taking liberties with how the body merges with the surface and how there are inroads into the body. There is that slit in the body, which is both becoming symbolic of the female, and it is also offering an opening, if you like, of her consciousness. This video was also, which she did when she was a student at the Rijks Academy in Amsterdam. It was a video in which there's a brown hand and a white hand, and the brown hand is actually sewing and doing the embroidery. This happened it came about after 9/11, which really overwhelmed Aisha, because in the West, she only heard the rhetoric of the West, which was, so anti-Islamic. The other hand, the white hand, unpicks the rose. And there's this grating noise as the embroidery is picked apart, and the surface is then left without the labor, without the beauty that was put in place by the brown hand. Ruby has already spoken about the circumstances of the beginnings of this work. And I would like to reiterate that when she did this work, which actually happened in my gallery in Lahore, and this is where this photograph took place, she described it in such poignant terms because it was about her birth. And she called it, "My birth will take place 1,000 times, no matter how you celebrate it," about the air of mourning that happened, when yet another female child was born. And there seemed to be no way of expressing it except to do it in this extremely graphic manner. And it's very interesting that the gallery is, of course, a space where certain kind of gallery goer will come. But this was out in the garden, and it was amazing how people in the neighborhood just walked in, people who'd never ever come into the gallery, and they were moved by this work. It spoke to people in a manner that it did not need the intermediary, which is the person who explains what a work is about, and salvaging and scavenging from the pieces of cloth. And she's talked about that already, how she never throws it away. And she talked to me about, how a dress or a piece of cloth becomes, when it's torn, it can become a cradle between the two ends of a cot, how when even that is torn apart, it can become a bandage, how people in the subcontinent never let go of materials. There's constant recycling. In the Harris Museum, where Ruby had residency, and these were the works she produced there. And I have to say that, you know, the life of these buffaloes, which, as you know, they settled on the wall of the gallery, they produced a certain kind of environment in which so many people who were walking around the museum said, that's exactly how I feel after a day's hard work. The fact that she removes those barriers that are between, you know, there's that basin, the water basin at the end that you see in the corner, which itself becomes this tired receptacle doing its job to the buffaloes with you know, old fabric stuffed with straw. Next. And then they go on, you know, this is a much later work, but you know, these themes follow her, or she follows the themes. They don't let go of her. The sheer humanity in the work, the spirit, the emotion, is something that is inherently both part of the process, the material, but also what she is invoking. The two somehow become, and this I just put in because I have not seen this performance, but I really am, you know, would love to see it, because she talked about architecture and how, you know, women are sort of so, they own architecture, if you like. And I felt, okay, so here she dons it, she wears it, it is her. And there is something, I don't know, very deeply questioning about the body of the artist and the body of the environment, which is the city, and who is part of what. Looking very quickly at the last artist who was part of this show, Risham Sayed. I should mention that Imran Qureshi was in the show also, and so was Anwar Said. But I just thought that I'd look at people who, especially who use textile processes. And these were works that happened very soon after 9/11, when we had, you know, we had time together in my gallery, and we called it Darmiyan, in between. That's how Pakistan found itself after 9/11. In between the war in Afghanistan and becoming, I would say, a pawn in the hands of those powers out to crush Afghanistan, or to, you know, create war on our borders. And Risha was, you know, this is the first time really she was looking at engaging with what were pretty embroideries that she was taught in school by the nuns at the convent where she studied, and good girls learned how to do that. And then very quickly, last couple of slides of the work that won her the Liaqat Prize in Art Dubai, in which it is far more investigative, because she was looking at trade routes across North Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and beyond into East Asia, looking at the movement of cotton and other goods. A lot of cartography was involved in this, and a lot of textile processes in these rather marvelous quilts, which involved applique, which involved wood block printing, they involved painting, they involved embroidery, they involved drawing right onto the fabric, including one unfortunate moment just before the unveiling of the works, when it was decided that she'd made, inverted commas, not so nice a mistake, in which she called something the Persian Gulf, which is a big no-no because of the location of UAE, and she had to paint some black paint over it. Then we had to do censorship on a textile work. So last image of looking at all the processes that are there: screen printing, applique, embroidery, and block printing, etc., etc. So that was really questioning the canon. And it happened because of the women's movement. It happened because of feminist art history. It happened because we were no longer satisfied with the way of working and the way of being silent as practitioners.
Thank you, Professor Hashmi. That was amazing, and it sort of gave so much context for all the various artists and the whole sort of idea of the way in which you worked with contemporary art, that as far as it's coincided with textiles. So what we're going to do next is move immediately into Zoreen, and after Zoreen speaks, I'm going to ask Amrita Javeri to have her screen shared, and she will give her talk. So just to reiterate, we're skipping Uttara's section, because anyway, elements of that, the lady who was meant to frame that is sick. So we will put that entire section to do with British heritage online. And so you're not being shortchanged of it. It's just that we've actually saved time in this way. So Kajali, can you let Zoreen share her screen now?
Thank you, Zara. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I hope everyone can hear me and also see the screen. I'm trying to go full screen here, but
okay, so if you know the little thing right at the bottom next to the 68 number, if you go and press that, it should go full screen.
Oh, is it gone full screen?
Yes. Yeah. We're good to go. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by talking briefly about how it is industrial exhibitions that we ultimately have to think about whenever we think of NCA. And the story goes all the way back to exhibitions. And this will be a sort of prelude to what I actually want to get to and I'm excited about are one or two documents I found at the NCA archives that sort of link to these ideas. And so our story begins with not with the building of Mayor School of Arts, but actually with the opening of the Punjab exhibition. And this takes place at what is now on the Mall Road, known as the Tollington Market, which I will show you in a bit. But if we go back in time, and if you look at the image, it is from 1864, and this is essentially what the space looked like on the eve of the exhibition, which took place. The design of the building hall and the architecture itself was copied and transplanted, something that occurs, will recur throughout this presentation. It was copied from a structure that was erected in the 1862 exhibition in South Kensington. And it was, right, so let's move on to the next one. Right. And so this is the interior of the exhibition as it took place. And this is an engraving. If we sort of look at what it looks like today, this is Tollington Market today. And it's called Tollington Market because after partition, it became like a wholesale livestock and fruit and vegetable market. And then later fell into disrepair, and then NCA has recently sort of restored it and taken over it. But this is what the exterior looks like now. And we're back to the image that I just showed you before, just to give you like a comparison of how much the space is more or less being utilized in the same way. If you look at how the display is arranged, the central aisle where the goods for the industrial exhibition were displayed remains the same. The niches are still there. And so it's this grand spectacle where goods are sort of displayed, and there are crafts and all sorts of commercial goods that are Indian. And so it is these industrial exhibitions and the success of this exhibition that took place at this particular space, and that becomes sort of the prelude or the sort of leads us into the formation of this idea that there should be like the space where there is a museum, a library, and an industrial school. And so we see the formation of the Lahore Museum. It's interesting that the Punjab Exhibition Hall remained operational many years after that exhibition. And I think, if I'm not wrong, Ajaib Ghar, or the House of Wonder, which is what Rudyard Kipling writes about in Kim, is a reference to the display and the wares that were displayed there. And so for many years, you have the Punjab Exhibition Hall displaying this until the Lahore Museum is constructed. And Bhai Ram Singh, who is actually a student of Mayo School of Arts, and we should come to that, actually designs both the Lahore Museum and the Mayo School of Art. And so what I'm getting at here is that it is this that sort of led to the formation of this larger proposal or project that the British had in mind. It was the formation of industrial schools across India. So you had 4 schools in 4 different parts of India. Mayo School of Art in Lahore was the last one to be built. The first principal was John Lockwood Kipling. And the idea behind the curriculum actually was again transplanted. It came from the National Art Training School, Kensington, and it was sort of applied to government-run institutions in general. And there were these different factors that prompted the forming or the foundation of these industrial schools. One of these was this idea that was being proposed by William Morris and the arts and crafts movement that was linking industry and art. You had massive industrialization taking place there. It was proclaimed that the objects are ugly, etc., and therefore we need to turn to beautiful things. There was that narrative, and then there is, of course, the narrative that since that beauty is being destroyed, we need to turn to tradition and preserving and saving. Another narrative. These 2 narratives are important because they become essentially the basis of the Mayo School of Arts and the ideas behind the curriculum and the mindset that was initially formed. And what you see on your right is an old image of the NCA, Mayo School of Art. And it's just to give you an idea of the kind of exercises students were taught there. The basic idea was that students enrolled in the Mayo School of Arts would make Indian handicrafts, but they would be suited to British taste. Another interesting thing was that they would study European methods, but those methods would be applied to make Indian art and architecture. And drawing and design were supposed to be the foundation of these of Mayo School of Arts. And just to give you like an idea of what I mean, if you look at the image on the right, it sort of tells you the kind of consummate skill that was involved. And this is by a student, Muhammad Deen, from the Mayo School of Art. And if you look at the image on the left, again, this is the kind of work that was, being produced by students in the Mayo School of Art. These are other images, again, produced by students of the Mayo School of Art. And so this is where it gets interesting. It was said at this time that taste and refinement in natives was lacking, and therefore it was imperative that the curriculum at the Mayo School of Art be sort of directed towards refining this. And so the criticism one could argue is that, is this not a form of cultural imperialism? Are you implying that, or was it implied at that time, probably was, that the native taste, as, and I say put that in quotes, is not as refined? And a very prominent art educator at the time, Sir Richard Temple, actually went so far as to say aesthetics is not a matter of taste or fancy, but established principles. And he said this with reference to this argument as he criticized Indian art. And so these are sort of the undertones that sort of also form the basis of industrial art schools. Now, so what was there before industrial art schools? You had the karkhana, or the ustad shagird system, or better known in English as the apprenticeship system, where knowledge was passed on from within family members. So it went from father to son or from father to relatives. The important thing was the connection of blood. And the way the British looked at it was, when they defined it, it was specific occupational caste groups practiced visual arts as hereditary occupation. So in a nutshell, what they were also trying to sort of, when they formed industrial schools, was say that we want to cut across this caste system divide and this this social divide, and sort of bring everyone under one umbrella. It was also proclaimed that the South Kensington model, which was followed by the Mayo School of Arts, was a model of flexibility as compared to, say, this rigid pre-modern system, which we call the apprenticeship system, which was all about, rote learning, copying, and memorizing. And so we then segue into the formation. We enter partition, and after a few years after partition, we see the formation of the NCA, National College of Arts, Lahore. What you see on top is the entrance, and what you see below is the Bhai Ram Singh courtyard. And this is the front courtyard of NCA. And these are some of the departments. Just to give you a quick run through, on the top right, you have the miniature department. On the top left, you have sculpture. Waterpride, we've got the printmaking department, and then of course you have painting. So this is just to give you an idea of sort of where we are at now. But I want to sort of backtrack and get back to what we were getting at, just so you know how this is all sort of brought back in when we open up the NCA archives, and it emerges as this very interesting mess or complexity, if you would allow me to call it that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to briefly, rather than making you read the full document, I'm going to read out a document which essentially discusses this dilemma. In an undated commentary on an exhibition held at Mayo School, a document that I have obtained from the NCA archives titled Arts and Crafts Exhibition in the Mayo School of Arts, one not only sees the encouragement of the applied arts as inclined towards a more hybrid design approach with the denigration of ornament as being not useful. So there are 2 points to consider here. One is the fact that ornamentation was sort of considered as this slow, not so sophisticated thing. And within the applied arts, it was important that things be kept simple and in line with what was aesthetically, what would be appreciated by, say, a European audience. The document is a review. It provides a review and account of the various examples of applied arts on display at the exhibition, and praises the role that Mayo School of Art has played in the progress and development of the applied arts. Praise and emphasis is repeatedly laid on usefulness and simplicity of line. For example, the writer praises the furniture on display, saying that it was useful and high-class furniture. Again, we have the word useful. And that there were admirable pieces of furniture with good and simple line, which makes them very attractive. So one begins to question whether the writer means to infer that the cabinet maker born and trained under, say, the apprenticeship system, the karkhana system, the ordinary cabinet maker, for example, is perhaps inferior as opposed to the ones trained at Mayo School, which was an industrial school formed as a response to what the British claimed was a pre-colonial and caste-promoting karkhana system. It also suggests that ornament in design essentially means lack of utility. And then he goes on to comment on the metalwork on display, and he praises it for its lack of ornamentation once more. And he says that there is hardly any overloading of ornaments, which has generally been the characteristic of Indian light metalwork in the past, which rendered them objects of curiosity rather than objects of utility. Now, this is really interesting because implicit in the writer's critique on Indian metalwork is again the reiteration of the assumption that ornament is a negative thing, which will condemn an object to the confines of not being aesthetically pleasing or not being useful. Or perhaps it will render it or put it in the category of the strange, exotic other, since the word objects of curiosity is used.
Sorry, sorry to be a pain, but we are so off schedule that I think you could sort of make the closing argument and
oh yeah, I'm just it's just maybe one paragraph and then we're sort of over anyway.
Sounds good, and it's very, very exciting what you have to say. So I'm really sorry about this.
That's okay. And so the argument that he's getting at is the same one that Sir Richard Temple got at, that established principles which can be learned, illustrated, and applied. That is essentially what art and design should be about. And he also ends it by saying and mentioning a French technique called decolonising, which I'm probably mispronouncing. But that is interesting that he mentions that it's been introduced at the Mayo School of Arts. And this is interesting because it was in the Great Exhibition of 1851 that Indian products were ironically actually praised precisely because of ornament and pattern, even though it wasn't considered useful in terms of form. So what I'm getting at here is the fact that Indian design has had to navigate, and I put the words Indian design in quotes. It has to had to navigate between varying divisions and definitions of how it was perceived globally, vis-a-vis in colonies, where relations of power redefined its perceptions, particularly in industrial schools, and whether these notions of perception between local and global continue to influence art and design today in a post-colonial context. And this is just another example of how flawed and interesting it is that you have this son of an artist, a son of a sepoy, and because his father is not an artisan, his scholarship has been rejected. And this had more to do and raises questions of, about whether it was okay for Mayo School of Art to do this, since it had just said that the apprenticeship system is all about blood and inheritance. And so that's not a good thing. It's very archaic, and it encourages casteism. In a sense, that's kind of what they were doing as well. And it leads back to one of Zehra's questions when I attended her class, what's in a name? Because when Mayo School of Art was, the process of naming was taking place, several names were proposed: Mayo Memorial School of Industrial Arts, Industrial School of Art and Design, Lahore School of Art. And so there is this confusion of how all of this links together if you are sort of saying that we've implanted another system here and we've brought it here, but you're also sort of borrowing piecemeal from ideas that you just criticized and rejected. And there was, of course, this idea that artisan classes, because artisans were specifically encouraged to take part and enter and take admission and see that they had a natural aptitude for technical arts, because for the British art educators and bureaucrats, artisan castes were an exception to the racial stereotype of a non-technical Indian. And so I'd just like to end by saying that race and this racial bias also played a major role in sort of these preconceived notions of what defining what art is, or what design is, or what an Indian native artisan should do or should not do, or whether he should be given a scholarship or not. And so what it leads to is like larger questions in terms of policy, curriculum, and this divide between the Naukri Pesha, the well-to-do class that was enrolled at Mayo School of Arts versus the artisan class, which wasn't well-to-do. and whether that was being perpetuated by the Neo School of Arts through, policy and other ideas. So, I mean, Zara, if you want to take it up from here.
Yeah, I mean, I really wish that we can see from the audience questions that this is such a rich debate and people are all sort of jumping in and wanting more. So I'm really desperately sorry. We've had all these technical issues and it's all taken like sort of longer. So we'll pick this conversation up as we sort of go into a Q&A, just to sort of flag up before Amrita comes on that, what Marine has said, kind of connects in many ways with ideas of South Asia and British design, which was going to be looked at with the two artists who are going to talk about the William Morris Gallery. So we will be putting that little video snippet, which they've already sent us, online, and this is something you can explore for yourself. Kajali also wanted to say that we are having technical issues and it's difficult for us to do a virtual tour. It might crash the system. So what we're going to do is go directly to Amrita. After Amrita will be Professor Ismail, and who will then open the floor to questions and answers. And we will put the visual, the little virtual tour. By next week, it'll be online, so you can access everything there. So thank you, Zoreen. And Amrita, perhaps you can share your screen.
Thank you, Zara, for inviting me to speak. Can everybody hear me well? Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, great. At the outset, I'd just like to say that I'm not an artist or an academic or a curator, but I'm the director of a gallery in Bombay that has championed artists who are not in the mainstream and whose works are generally materially driven. The artists I want to highlight today are Anwar Shemza and Mrinalini Mukherjee. However, in the interest of time, if we run out of time, I'll stop at Shemza and we can decide whether we want to go ahead or not. The one thing I'd like to say about both these artists, and of course about Monica Correa, who was originally on the list of artists that I was going to talk about as well, is that they don't consider themselves textile artists per se. They were not formally trained in textiles or ever exhibited along textile artists. However, it is their deep interest in their own heritage, in craft, and most importantly, their commitment to experimentation, which led them to work with textiles. For those of you familiar with the artists, I thought I would just give a quick cycle through some of the works and then talk about how we as a gallery have promoted individual artists so that they're no longer seen as outsiders to the art establishment and have become part of the very dynamic and changing narrative of South Asian art. As a show to which this series of talks is about Pakistani artists in inverted commas, I thought I'd begin with a work of Anwar Shemza, an artist from Pakistan who came to UK in the 1950s. And here he is, seated amongst his paintings at the Commonwealth Institute in 1969. Shemza liked to claim that he was born on a carpet. His grandfather owned carpet looms, and Shemza was fascinated by the textile crafts of Pakistan and India. He traveled through Pakistan for 3 months in 1962, collecting fine examples of traditional textiles and jewelry. Several of his works produced were titled Magic Carpets, such as this one from 1961, evoking his journey from India to Pakistan and then from Pakistan to England. The Magic Carpet series also has a spiritual significance through their deliberate association with prayer rugs. Shemza didn't just use the form of the carpet or textiles, but actually used fabrics in his work. For example, in this series of black and white drawings from 1957, he used muslin. To achieve this texture, he dipped muslin in gouache, wrung out the muslin, laid it down with newspaper, and stamped on it with his flip-flops. Muslin textures provide contrast to the bold, solid areas of these beautiful black and white drawings, which we showed in our first solo show since the onset of the pandemic, called Black Beyond Sight, alongside textile artist Parul Thakkar and the delicate carbon drawings of Amina Ahmad. So that's a view of the work, Shemza's work, alongside Parul Thakkar's sculptural textile-based piece. So Shemza worked with basic forms which were visually and culturally neutral as possible. In his mind, they were visually and culturally neutral: the square, the circle, and the semicircle. But look carefully, and you can see it is painted on a frayed textile, an element from his cultural memory of being surrounded by textiles in his home. By the late 1950s and 60s, Anwar began working with fabric, which he prepared by staining or by successive dipping into diluted paint. He preferred old cloth and liked to exploit any holes and frayed edges as an integral part of the painting. So this is obviously very different from the very rich and embroidered traditions we've seen thus far. He's just using any old kind of fabric he finds. In many works, he made the background of hand-dyed cloth and paper, hand-painted with muslin or other subtle textures that were meticulously prepared. So here you can see a collage work where he's experimented with Japanese paper. So I'd say he used lots of, for him, textiles was a way to experiment while making his paintings. Shemza passed away in 1985, and these were some of the last works that he made, and they belong to a series called the Root series. Basically, they're based on calligraphy and ornamental designs that you find in Oriental carpets and textiles, and also floral forms. He was a very keen gardener. Yeah, so these series of Root paintings were also relay the anguish of a diasporic artist in a very formally restrained language. I'd say for Shemza, his family involvement in carpet making was an enduring influence on his work. His consistent engagement with textiles set him apart from many of his peers, but it also opened up his work beyond conventional painting. And I'd like to suggest that experimentation was at the very core of Shemza's practice. He worked in painting, printmaking, ceramics, photography, collage. He was also a published author. The sheer variety and heterogeneity of his work proved to be a big asset for us as a gallery. It was an opportunity to exhibit the work in different contexts, to open it out beyond the established narrative of Shemza being a member of the Lahore Art Circle, coming to London, suffering an identity crisis, destroying his own work, and embracing geometric abstraction. This is a story that is usually told, but when we decided to engage with his work, we tried to open it up a bit. So you can see one of the first projects we did in the gallery in Mumbai was we started including Shemza in a collage show, in a group show called Considering Collage. His work was shown alongside that of his contemporaries from India and younger diasporic voices. Just want to show you an image. If you can see two in-store views, and you can see in the view at the bottom, there's a painting by K.G. Subramaniam, a Shemza next to it, and then a Mohannad Kader, an artist from Sri Lanka, and his collage works. Moving on, we try with a lot of the artists to not just show them at the gallery in India, but to try and take them into new territories and show them in different places. This was a project for Art Dubai in 2014, where we presented a single series of work highlighting Shemza's interest in seriality. This, in some ways, was a tremendous risk for the gallery because, I mean, obviously, when you take things to art fairs, you know, you basically try and produce a variety of work or show a variety of work rather than just one singular body. that is one of the square compositions. And if you look closely, I don't know if it's really clear, but this is painted, but it also has collage elements where he's used the canvas in the green shapes that he's cut through. So you can see a little bit of the texture of canvas. So he was always playing, whether it was with canvas or with textile. A very different context to show the work. This was at the Dhaka Art Summit in 2014 in Bangladesh. Here we presented Shamsa alongside Rashida Raeen, an artist from Karachi, also living in the UK, and a young British Bangladeshi artist called Rana Begum. I think the stand attracted fair attention for its carefully considered presentation of 3 generations of British artists from South Asia with an interest in abstraction. And here at the Sharjah Art Museum, which had a focus on his printmaking, which was also a very important part of his practice. I think his printmaking practice is extremely sophisticated and really quite overlooked. So this was a great opportunity for us to collaborate with Dr. Paula Sengupta on showing these wonderful prints. And then there is the work that Shamsa made using pyrography. So I'm just foregrounding all the different kind of experimental practices. This was at the Gwangju Biennale in 2014. The exhibition was titled Burning Down the House, and all the works in the section had to do with the experience of fire and burning. So I'd say within a few years of beginning to work with the artists, the gallery had facilitated the work traveling to Dubai, to India, to Sharjah, to Dhaka, and to Korea. That's a closer view of abstract writing from 1965, which was in the Gwangju Biennale. I think what we were coming up against quite a lot while showing this work all around the world was that until then, what had existed was few brochures, pamphlets, and other ephemeral materials on Shamsa. So we decided that it was time really that we put gallery resources towards also commissioning a publication. For the publication, we secured a good publisher, some funding from the very generous Rangoonwala Foundation, and commissioned 5 essays by curators and academics and writers around the world. The publication included also some rare archival material. I'd say it is this delicate balance of commercial and institutional shows and academic engagement that have facilitated the renewed attention on Shamsa's works. This is a free display of Shamsa's works at Tate Britain, which opened in 2015 and was on view for a year and a bit. That's once again at the Dhaka Art Summit in 2016, alongside other artists such as Zahurul Laklak, Krishna Reddy, Lionel Wendt in a section called Rewind. This is another presentation in Dubai. We wanted to follow up our first with another kind of presentation where he was placed in conversation with Zahurul Laklak, another artist we had discovered actually purely by going to Dubai. Later, the same year, Shamsa's works were included in the fantastic post-war exhibition at the Haus der Kunst, curated by Okwi Enwezor. And here you can see his red meme painting, alongside painting and sculpture by other well-known artists, including, I think there's little sculptures by Shuker I can see, and Lydia Clark. That's once again at the Sharjah Biennale. I think one of the things that I also realized that it was really important to collaborate with other galleries to extend the conversation around Shamsa and his works. In the UK, we collaborated with Hales Gallery, and there's a view from Hales. And in the UAE with Green Art Gallery to show some of the works. Hales then took on representation of Shamsa and showed the work in America, which opened up again, US institutional interest. So I'd say although a lot of work has been done on Shemza, a lot remains to be done, as he was not just an artist, I mentioned, he was also a literary figure, writing poetry from a young age, novels and radio plays. One that I would like to read is his gripping love novel called Kissa Kahani from 1954, with its hero Naseem, whose story bears a striking resemblance to Shemza's own life. However, all these stories are in Urdu and would require translation. So that's another big project that we'd at some point would like to get involved in. So I just wanted to then move on to Mrinalini Mukherjee's works, and I just wonder if we have time to do that or whether we should stop here.
There's been quite a lot of requests, so perhaps you could just do 2 slides of Mrinalini, and then, you know, something that you said yesterday on our rehearsal, which really struck me, was the fact that, you know, neither of these artists, you said, thought of themselves as fiber artists.
Right.
It was just one medium that they were using, and I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, and then you could do Mrinalini work, and then
Sure.
Hand it.
Okay. So yeah, the next artist I'd love to discuss is Mrinalini Mukherjee, and here she's on the left as a young woman with her fiber sculpture, and on the right with her bronzes. Mukherjee's sculptures in hemp fiber, ceramic, and bronze consistently challenge the way that art, craft, and modernism were discussed. Her hand-wrought, labor-intensive approach stands out in contrast to the kind of dominant narratives of Western art history, in part because her sculpture, like so many other artists working in fiber in Europe and the United States in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, could easily have been labeled as fiber art or craft, a designation that disenfranchised a whole generation of artists that included Mukherjee and included other well-known artists such as Sheila Hicks. They were just kind of, you know, dismissed as being sort of craft-based artists. Given Mukherjee's choice of material, she too might have been pigeonholed as a fiber artist or craftsperson and not given the appropriate critical appraisal befitting of a sculptor of her caliber. I just wanted to show you, maybe cycle through some of the sculptures. So basically not given the appropriate critical appraisal befitting a sculpture of her caliber. Investigating her sources of inspiration, her life in post-partition India, her approach to material and processes, and her relative isolation from the Western art world clarifies why her position in the ambit of contemporary sculpture aligns more closely with that of other sculptors, such as Robert Morris or Eva Hess, rather than fiber artists as such. So I just wanted to talk just a little bit about her sculpture and how she started. She was a student in Baroda in 1960s and studied painting and mural design under K.G. Subramanian, a well-known proponent of the view that art needs to have an integral connection to craft. And he encouraged her to explore alternative material. And it was his refusal to apply Western hierarchy regarding arts and crafts that was actually to have a profound influence on her. So some of these works she started making for a craft fair, which was like your end of year, thesis show or whatever you'd call it, as a craft fair. I'd say of her choice of fiber, she says, I was attracted to the medium, not because it was commonplace. I just liked the look of natural fibers like hemp and sisal, and they were not expensive then. So that was an important thing for her as well. Can I do maybe 1 or 2 more? So you could see her work as it develops. So these are more.
So let's just do these 2 and and then end with the
Okay. And I think due to her material choices, Mukherjee struggled all her life to be accepted as a sculptor, let alone an artist. In sharp contrast to her male colleagues who made pedestal sculpture in stone, wood, or bronze, much of her work was either hung or floor-based or made using hand-dyed and knotted hemp fiber. So the mainstream of modern artists in India, as Zara, you would know, rejected traditional artisanal skills and vernacular idioms, and she fell victim to that view. So she was basically, she said, they think that if you're not working with some stone or bronze, you're not macho enough. It's not that I have a problem with those mediums. It's just that I like my work to be additive or organic, something that keeps growing. And I'd say that sculpture basically was generally taught in India with reference to international modernism, you know, with Brancusi and Moore as reference points. Also, the fact that she was not really trained as a sculptor meant that she was ignorant of the limits of her materials and disregarded them. And she had no, actually, she didn't do any preparatory drawings or anything to make these absolutely stunning sculptures. I just wanted to talk a little bit about her commissions and things, because she spent years in the wilderness, not actually having a market for the works that she was making. So she worked on commission. She also worked in bronze and ceramic, and I wanted to show this combination of all three materials in this image. We could send her show at the National Gallery of Modern Art. So yeah, I think I'll end there basically and just sum up that I think in terms of showing and promoting these artists, I felt that putting their works in contextual exhibitions was really important. These are some of the, and I just show you, for instance, this was in an exhibition at the gallery on abstraction and gender in the 70s, and included works by Lubna Latif Agha, Mrinalini Mukherjee. This work is currently at the Tate now, and other artists. So this was at the Camden Arts Center, this particular piece, Frieze Masters, Metropolitan Museum, and this was the last show, the most recent show we had at the gallery, which was of her bronzes. So I think I'll end there.
Thank you, Amrita. That was really fascinating. And I think it sort of ties into lots of what Zoreen was also talking about in terms of how these sort of departments thought of craft and the sort of idea of hereditary craft that was then kind of didn't have the same status as art. But also it kind of links to what David was saying about, you know, his own background at early life doing sort of sculpture, but then towards what he's doing now is a sort of undercutting this sort of very male minimalist tradition. And I thought that was, that's a lovely place to stop with Mrinalini. And I'm going to hand over to Professor Ismail, who will sort of give us like our little keynote that brings things to a close. And we have time, I think, maybe for a couple of questions as well. Hi, Julie, can you give a screen share to Professor Ismail, maybe?
Yes, they've got one. Yeah.
Hi, if you press the little, that.
Mrs. Ismail, your mic is off.
Mic is off? No.
Now it's on.
Okay, thank you. Technology and me are not great friends. So it's just that it is very, very exciting to be part of this. So thank you again. But also the work has been, it's just, there is so much to reflect upon that I just wish that, this continues, this kind of interdisciplinary collaborative direction continues. And that we have more and more exhibitions and more and more curators who will then continue with the same in the same ethos. And over the last 50 plus years, I have remained in awe, and I've been humbled by the unsung heroes of the South Asian subcontinent who continue to weave, embroider, print magic in our lives. And it is opportune that via the work displayed today that we are remembering their work, and we are remembering patterns of the past. And most importantly, Zehra, I love your quote about dismantling stereotypes of Pakistani art, because that is what successfully all the artists that you've chosen have done, and so has this exhibition. So what I have done is that I have tried to put together a selection of the past and present of our shared heritage. And unfortunately, just a glimpse, and I have to rush through it because I think we've lost half our audience, not because of a lack of the magnificent specimens of craft that we have inherited, but understandably the limitation of time. But I want to reiterate and I want to emphasize that I give today a respect to plurality, diversity, inclusivity, and the miracles that culture, art, and craft can create. And we would also, I also want to say that we are to imagine that traditional skills, because they are passed down from generation to generations, remain rigid. No, not at all. They don't. They all think and feel both with the head and the hand, and the head and the hand continues to work together in the process of making. The skill is important, but so is the emotional intelligence, and the humility for the raw material turns them into works of art. I want to quote here Kamla Chattopadhyay in Jasleen Dhameja's book. I mean, this amazing, amazing lady, Kamala, who was Chattopadhyay, who was responsible for pioneering and uplifting the lives of the crafts women, and the kind of service that she did against all odds is just absolutely remarkable. And she has such a feeling. She says, where the earth is dry and burns under voluptuous rays as in deserts, where life is grim and resources poor, the people seem to compensate with riotous color and exuberant forms, creating a sense of luxuriance through their craft. There is a breathless eagerness created in the atmosphere, a springtime dazzle in the garments, and even in the trappings and decorations of their domestic animals. I will start my slide presentation now. But I also want to thank, because some of the pictures are from the uncut cloth and colors of the Indus. So thank you for, I've been using that. This is my first picture, and these incredible women, because I have worked with crafts for a long time and traveled a lot in Sindh. And this woman who is taking a devotional offering to the shrine. But when Kamala Chattopadhyay talks about the springtime dazzle in the garments, this is exactly what you see. And even the devotional offering is, she's carrying it in a black cloth with glitter and verses of the Quran written on it. Right from her headwear to her shalwar, it's absolutely, it's a picture of riotous colors. This is a toran. All the Gujarati speakers will understand that. The toran is a welcome sign for the doorway. It is also, it is auspicious. It is also to keep the evil eye away. But then this is from the Tharparkar region, and the desert has this wonderful, incredible, rich embroidery, which, and all the motifs coming from their environment. And this amazing maroon and saffron color, which is predominant in their work. Oh, okay, this incredible choli, again from the Tharparkar desert, where mirror work is so important because of the dazzle and because person in this wilderness can be identified easily. It's also to do with deflecting the evil eye. But what I would like here to emphasize here is the incredible creativity which has gone into it. I mean, the two sleeves are not alike. And you know, that just tells it that this woman had the courage, for whatever reason that she did not. The motifs on both are different, and so are the colors. So that is something to think about, because, and like I said, it's the head and the hand. So it's not just something which could have been produced repeatedly. No, it's a very individual expression of the lady, whoever it was. But it's a beautiful specimen. When it rains in the desert, where it very seldom rains, the peacocks come out to dance, and it is a big cause for celebration. And this wonderful embroidery, again from the Thatparkar Desert, expresses that with its beautiful colors and the imagery and the stylization of the imagery, which just makes it just so creative. We talked about the animals and how important they are to a desert dweller's entourage and family. And this particular animal, if you see, has been decorated with henna, but it also has, I don't know if you can see the 786, because I can't, because there are, if the 786 actually is very important. Is anybody questioning that? Because I would like to tell you what it means. In Arabic literature, there is a numerology equation in which words and letters are converted into numbers. 786 converts directly into Bismillah Rahman Rahim, literally means in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. So it has been very, very cleverly used by this owner of this camel. The beast is very precious to him. This is again a slide, a picture to show you the art that can be created by using the camel. They are using a scissor to cut off the camel's hair and expose the skin, and then it's almost sculptural, the way he is working on the camel skin, and the motifs are age old, and this is being done like today. So it's something which has been passed on, and it continues, it thrives with this camel decoration, whether it is for a camel and horse and cattle camel fair, or whether it is for sacrificial animals, but that this is the labor of love that they invest in their animals. And the one on the right, again, the hair has been shaved or cut, and henna has been used to make very, very beautiful patterns on the camel. So I like Amrita said, you know, artisanal craft, artisanal art. How does this not compare with, or is not recognized as art, is a big question for me, and continues to remain a question. Next one. This is Naiza's work, and I used Naiza's work because Naiza has used henna, so it is a common medium, and I wanted to just show the conceptual artist's work and the artisanal work. So the henna becomes a signifier of lyricism as well as the tenacity of women. And Naiza uses henna, reminiscent of how women's hands are decorated for festivals and weddings. In her work, though, the pattern caresses and delineates her whole body. This is from a quote from Shalima Hashmi's book, Unveiling the Visible. This was made on a wall in a low-income neighborhood in Karachi, and it surely raised many, many questions to the passerby, to the viewer, out of curiosity, acceptability, wonder, and so many perceptions. I mean, this must have caused endless conversations to take place. And it was just very, very courageous of Naiza to have this on this wall here in this particular place. I leave you to find meanings in both, in the rural, the artist and the artisan's work that you see, who are using a common medium, because to me, it raises many questions, and I'm sure it does to you also. These are not to be compared. We are not saying that one is better than the other, but they are both our works of individual genius, I feel. And the commonality is the raw material, the head and the hand, one in an urban environment and the other in the rural. This is again this incredible women of Sindh, who, by the way, traditionally the women are the weavers, and they pick cotton, they run their households, they cook, they tend to the children, they embroider, they weave, and they are the most empowered, amazing, amazing women of Sindh. And this particular woven rug is called the Farasi. It is made of either sheep's wool or camel wool. And Badin is very, very famous for that. Of course, their heads are always covered. You can hardly see their face. And that is why this photograph was taken by one of my students, and we could not take it from the front. So that is the tenacity of these women. This is just an example, a beautiful, beautiful tie-and-dye example of the mastery of craft in the bandhani medium or the tie-and-dye medium, and where the local, the indigenous motifs and symbols have been used. The peacock, of course, the ever popular one in Thadparkar, and the one on the right, the black and red, this is just so amazing and looks so contemporary. Has been made for years and years in a small village called Hatungo in Sangad area of Sindh. This is a jhola, which is a very, very creative, very simple, very almost architectural in its construction, where in the village, the doors are open, the animals are in the courtyard, but sometimes the animals do come in because the doorway is open. So that is why if there is anything precious or edible, then this kind of a jhola is hung from the ceiling of the hut. I have also picked this slide not just for its construction, but for its incredible use of stitches, motifs, forms, colors, ornamentation. It's just difficult to imagine how gifted and how much love, what a labor of love it is for the artisan. This is a quilted dowry bag. Again, we are traditionally great recyclers of material and great conservators of material. And like Ruby said, you never throw anything away, and everything is so precious. And this is just an example of the using remnants of cloth and then layering it with stitches and layering it with tassels and layering it with mirrors, and just ending up with something so beautiful for a dowry bag. We go on to Punjab and Hazara. I mean, there were millions of slides, but I had to really use restraint because of the time. And this is a women's shawl, but again, it's architectural when you see the layout and the composition of why, and that is the triangle denotes the area where the shawl covers the head, because it is always worn, the pulkari, the chadar is always worn on the head, or always used as held by 4 people as a shelter for the bride when she is leaving her home. That is a pillowcase from Swat to show you the kind of the variety of this extremely rich tradition that we have inherited, and how the artisans, how the craftspersons, how the embroiderers use their heritage. This is very much influenced by Central Asia, and of course the Silk Route that was talked about played an important role. And these are the colors that the Swatis use. The next one, the next slide, David, this is a special one for you. You talk about dwelling in the garden. And this, I don't know if you're still there, David.
I am, I'm right here.
You are. Okay, this is specially for you, because this rumal from Swat is, if you see the border and the 4 corners and the ram's horn motif, and then the head, the tessellated to look like human figures, but also this wonderful tree of life on the 4 corners and the garden in the center. It's just so beautifully planned that it reminds me of your gardens that you talk about.
Thanks. It also reminds me of the motifs in a lot of Afghani rugs of war.
Exactly, because that is the same region. Because again, you see, Afghani rugs of war are again using contemporary, whatever their in their environment, the motifs that they are being influenced by. But these are the Swati ones, which are just using these. Their ram's horn motifs are very important for them. And so is the tree of life, and so is the central medallion. Extremely important in their embroidery. And these are the colors that they use, and it is really just so exceptional. So,
Professor Ismail, shall we sort of, I think that's a nice place to kind of start wrapping up, and maybe we can open it to Q&A. Would that be okay with you?
If you can give me 2 more minutes, I'd just like to run through something.
Okay.
Okay, Indus Kohistan. This was, again, like I said, that this is a it looks very contemporary, but it is age old, this densely woven felted coat. The chitral caps. This actually reminded me of Liaqat Rasul's work, and that is why I used it for the riot of color and the kind of beads and the tassels and things. This again is the cross-stitch cap of Hunzab, and of course Risham Sayyed's work, needlework lesson series, which, like Salima said, that we all good girls at the convent school learned this. This is, of course, my dear Adeela's work. On the right is the Mubarizun series, when she talked about her headless soldiers of the Caliphate army. And on the left is the Zuljana, which is the horse which is used as a symbol on the 10th of Muharram on Ashura, because the Zuljana, it was Imam Hussein's horse, who is remembered for his loyalty and strength and endurance. But it was the repoussé work and the kind of medium which I just wanted to put these slides together, and that was important that you see it, that you all see it. This is again something we are like, you know, our grandmothers and our mothers and our great grandmothers were, like I said, the best recyclers and never left anything, never threw away anything. So this is the Rafu Gari, and this was a collaborative project. The exhibition Pale Sentinels was curated by Salima Hashmi for the Icon Gallery, and the work is the late Priya Ravish Mehra's on the left and mine on the right, where we both exchanged these shawls and used them with the same technique of the Rafu Gari, but of course in the contemporary context that we felt in our conceptual way, but that we were thinking. Okay, we're almost at the end. These are the baskets in the local bazaar. But this slide is important because this is a collaboration between the fine art faculty, the textile faculty, and the students of IVS to show you how the craft is very much the common thread in all the artwork that we have seen in the exhibition today and the slides that we see today. Yeah, that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ismail. That was fantastic. And I'm so glad you showed the Priya Ravish Mehra. It was really, yeah, it's a work that I was hoping that Uttara might speak a little bit about, because she was trying to acquire a series for Manchester, and then that somehow I think it didn't happen. But yeah, I mean, I love the way you've sort of, well, actually woven everything together for us. Do we want to just quickly go into a Q&A, and if people have questions that they want to ask, this would be the time. Anything?
Does anyone have any questions for any of the artists or any of the speakers? Yeah, should ask them now, because I think we're going to be ending very soon otherwise.
Yes, I can say something, says Stephanie.
Okay, go ahead, unmute yourself and say something.
Hi, yes, I'd just like to observe, I've been to India a few times, and I must say I was always completely dazzled by the textiles, and not just the fabric, but the whole way that a woman's every attention is paid to the hair and the jewelry and the whole aesthetic. And I suppose I'm just a little bit, I'd just like to observe that it seems to me interesting that many of the textiles we've seen today are treat fabrics as in a flat way, they're two-dimensional rather than it's almost as though there's a squeamishness about fashion, as though that fashion can't be approached directly and has to be mediated, as though the body, the textiles that ornament a body need to be kind of flattened out, and in doing so I wonder if their artistry is slightly denied.
I think this is a really interesting question, and I actually don't agree with you. And I wonder if Ruby might actually pick up on this, because it seems to me that the way in which she uses textile and fashion is anything but flat. I mean, it's talking about the body, and they're sculptures much more than they're flat wall hangings. So Ruby, do you want to say?
Thank you. Yes, I do agree, because the desire to create three-dimensional and to see it in a physical space is kind of a very strong desire. And you cannot just, work on a flat surface, whether it's embroidery or sewing or stuffing or whatever it is, it has to be physical. It has to be touched and walked around, and so which you can hold in your hands like a toy, a rag doll, a animal figure or whatever. So I feel that in my work I strongly use the 3-dimension as a as to sort of enrich or invite the viewer and my own self for surprises, because while you're making your hands do some surprises along the way that you don't otherwise can predict. So absolutely, yes.
If I can jump in there also, I remember very vividly Ruby's work, with the group that we started off with, that she'd used an old piece of cloth from one of her father's quilts. And the discussion we had then was of the memory that resides in a used textile, that it brings its memory with it into the new work, and it is transformed and becomes something else. And I think this whole business of constantly recycling, which so many of these women who are from different areas of Pakistan, because that is what Shanaz has shown us, is there is constant recycling, and there is a transformation that happens every time a piece of work, a piece of cloth, a garment acquires a new life, because it carries something with it. And as it wraps itself around a woman, or then later wraps itself around a young girl, or then wraps itself around a baby, each time it becomes something different, because there's a different kind of body that it is becoming part of. So I think there is the 3-dimensionality of the material is something that you work with when you work with it. Part of it is, of course, the embellishment and the ornamentation, but then it takes charge and it covers the body. So it does acquire a 3-dimensionality. I mean, this is what I think.
That's exactly what I wanted to say also, that when the costume is worn by the person, it does take on a 3-dimensionality, like in the slides that I showed of the women wearing those very elaborate costumes. It does become sculptural because it does take on a 3rd dimension.
I think I'd just like to supplement what Mrs. Hashmi and Shanaz said. And the fact that we don't consider context when we look at pattern or fabric. Where was it placed? Who wore it? When? What was the purpose or function? And as Mrs. Hashmi pointed out, that memory plays a great role. And then there is ceremony. There are so many different emotions associated with it. I mean, frayed fabric, such as the one that we saw, can equally be associated with trauma. So it doesn't really remain a pattern or flat then. And then, of course, there is the fact that the iconography, some of that that we see is, as Shahnaz Ismail pointed out, with the paradisal garden approach, it's sort of timeless, and so it then transcends definition, and then it doesn't remain flat. I would agree that there is a mediation, and perhaps that is to do with culture. I don't know, because I'm a student or a graduate of miniature painting. There is always this question that why is it flat? Why is it not 3-dimensional, or why is it not realistic? And so I'm sort of trying to link it to that there is a certain amount of mediation, but it is quickly and swiftly complemented by all of these other contexts that jump in. And so it completes itself in that way.
Thank you. I think that we sort of have dealt with that question. Does anyone else have something they want to say? I mean, of course, all the artists play with ideas of flatness, right? And one of the things that we didn't really get a chance to talk about is the work itself, in the way in which all of the artists here have a conversation with art history, as I see it, and with ideas of what counts as a painting, what counts as a sculpture, what counts as women's work, what counts as, something you buy in a bazaar, and questions of value, and where all of those things cross over into something you sort of put in a gallery and call art and contemporary art. And I think they're all very much sort of working with textile, but that work with textile is such that it's a conversation. Like these are open conversations, yeah. So I just wanted to say that. Does anyone else have something they want to say? Otherwise, I think Kajali we're so over time, but at the same time, people have stayed behind. So if anyone has more that they would like to contribute, otherwise we might bring it to an end.
I just wanted to say that we were, as artists and designers and architects, we do, see that form follows function in terms of the, 19th, 20th century. So that really does determine what kind of form will come out. That's an important aspect that we cannot let go or forget. So form, has to follow the function, and it's up to the artist that what kind of outcome they want to have. So it's not something that has to be forced. It's not something that has to, but it's always at the back of our mind, when we are working.